Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 25 Part 2 Attack of the High Orcs. The members of the strike squad looked to be steadfast. As they walked quietly toward their fate in total silence, the female healer approached Jinwoo and started rummaging through the gear on his back. Jinwoo turned his head to the side.
"What are you doing?"
"Just a second." She pulled out a cute little purse.
"I've always gotten strangely anxious when I'm separated from this for too long,"
she explained without anyone prompting her. She then took out a notebook and pen from the purse and started to scribble something down. Her head bumped into Jinwoo's shoulder a few times because she wasn't looking where she was going. Scritch. She soon closed her notebook. She took her purse, which she'd slung over her shoulder while writing, and shoved it back in the gear pack, but she held on to the notebook. She thrust it at Jinwoo, who'd been eyeing her warily. The female healer choked back tears as Jinwoo stared at the notebook in his hand.
"I've written a message for my family. Please give this to them when you get out."
If he laughed here, she would probably feel hurt, right?
"I'll hang on to this, but I doubt I'll get the chance to deliver it to your family." "That's okay."
She nodded sympathetically. "With these orc warriors watching us so intensely, it'll be hard for him to escape." Plus, the luggage carrier was but an E rank. She didn't yet understand what Jinwoo was getting at. Soon, they arrived at the lair. The other hunter's trepidation was palpable, and Jinwoo could feel it on his skin. They were all in this together. Jinwoo surveyed the area. It was a wide cavern, bigger than the giant's lair from yesterday, but it didn't feel bigger because of all the high orcs filling the room. There were over twice as many of them here as the force that had been sent to escort them. There's about 100. No, maybe a little more. No wonder there hadn't been magic beasts elsewhere in the dungeon. They were all here. Kahun looked at the rows of orcs, and the blood drained from his face. If this many high orcs ever escaped the gate, there were enough of them to destroy a small city before the strongest hunters could arrive. Kahun's back broke out in a cold sweat. "We need to get rid of the boss at least." He swallowed hard and dug down on his resolve. High orcs cleared the way so the hunters could pass.
"Ah, shack."
The high orc leader waved them through. The squad followed their escort to an altar in a corner of the lair.
"Look!"
One of the hunters pointed to the top of the altar. There stood a high orc shaman decked out in all manner of accessories, including a mask, bone necklace, and bone earrings. "That's the boss." Kahun stiffened. He could tell that most of the massive amounts of mana filling the dungeon originated from this magic beast. The four lugs guarding it with shrewd gazes also didn't seem to be the typical high orc. This isn't good. Would they be able to get past those guards to take down the boss once and for all? Each of the hunters had similar concerns. They stopped in front of the shaman. The tension between the high orcs and humans, as they regarded each other from a distance, was absolutely electrifying.
"Huh?"
The shaman wasn't bothered at all. It opened its hideous maw and cackled from beneath its creepy mask.
"Welcome, humans."
The strike squad members exchanged looks. Once Kahun gives the signal, we all charge at the same time, aimed directly for the shaman. They were waiting for a good time to pounce. But then, the air around them started growing colder. This squad consisted of the best, so they all reacted immediately to the change in temperature. The cause of this was the shaman. As it took off its mask, the sheer power of its magic burst out in full force. Whoosh! Terrifying waves of magic flared. The hunters all froze, like a herd of deer that had come face to face with a tiger.
"Oh my God! How could anyone have this much mana? That too we have to fight?"
Frustration, lamentation, resentment, And regret? The shaman sneered as it took in the varying emotions on the hunters' faces.
Are you afraid of me, humans?
Cahun bit down hard on his lip and forced himself to take a step forward to ask,
Why did you bring us all the way here? You could have let your warriors kill us.
The shaman gave a creepy, bone-chilling leer.
For entertainment. What?
Cahun didn't know what to say. That's why the beast had brought them here. The shaman continued.
While we bide our time, I'm going to kill you people one by one for my minions' amusement.
Grah! The high orc warriors cheered. The hunters crumbled under the pressure from the orcs and had difficulty breathing. One hunter began to cry.
However,
the shaman paused. Its gaze stopped on Jin Wu.
There is something odd among you humans.
At that, Cahun's eyes lit up. It's distracted, so this is our chance. The veins in his neck strained.
Now!
Cahun bellowed, pulling out his sword as he rushed forward. But there was only silence behind him. Huh? He looked back at his colleagues as he ran and saw them glued to their spots. They had lost the will to fight in the face of this overwhelming power. His heart sank. No, but someone had to do this. He couldn't stop here. He faced forward again. The shaman continued jeering at them, and its guards were just standing there. This could be their one and only chance. Whether it be by luck or by providence, as long as his sword could reach. TMP, TMP, TMP. Cahun charged with all his strength and raised his blade high.
Yah!
But he bounced off something well before he could strike. Crash! It was a magical force field.
Ugh!
Cahun was knocked to the ground and tumbled a few times, but he didn't roll around for long.
Here's the first volunteer.
With the shaman's ridicule, Cahun's body shot into the air. It was anti-gravity magic. The shaman's lips continuously moved as it magically hoisted Cahun as high as a 2-story building, then cast a different spell. Gravity acceleration. Wham! Cahun instantly slammed into the ground.
GUH!
Even before his mind could fully process the pain, his body was rising into the air again.
Anti-gravity.
Heh. The shaman and other orcs were cackling so hard, their fangs were on full display. Wham!
Arg!
Wham!
Gaw!
The shaman toyed with Cahun, raising and dropping him again and again. The 4th time the hunter hit the ground, blood splattered out of his mouth. His comrades watched with their faces turning ashen. Yet none dared to help him.
Cahun!
They could only stand there trembling as they watched him break. Thud. The female healer fell to the ground as she lost the strength in her legs. The shaman eventually raised Cahun's body into the air for a 5th time.
This one's lasting longer than I expected. And GHHH.
A moan escaped from Cahun. He'd kept his grip on his sword this entire time, as if there was still hope. Wham! Wham! Cahun's blade finally dropped from his hand as he was driven into the ground multiple times. Clang! Just then, Cahun's falling body vanished. The shaman blinked. Where could that bag of broken bones have gone? The boss scanned the lair for Cahun's presence. It located Cahun lying in a corner nearby. Beside him was another man, Jin Wu. Jin Wu had laid Cahun on the ground and was now glowering at the shaman.
May I ask you something, Captain?
Cahun still hadn't quite processed what had happened to him.
Am I okay to kill all the magic beasts present? What are you talking about?
As the disgruntled shaman pointed with its chin, one of the guards dashed toward Jin Wu, swinging its machete. With his eyes aglow, Jin Woo fixed his gaze on the approaching beast and extended his palm. Ruler's hand. The guard flew into the air, as if he'd been snatched up by a giant hand.
Jiga?
The beast flailed in vain. How? The shaman's mouth dropped open. When Jin Woo pointed his finger down, wham! The guard hurtled to the ground. Cracks formed where it had landed from the impact. But Jin Woo didn't stop there. He raised the guard's body back into the air again, just as the shaman had done to Kahun. Wham! 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 The guard cried out as it ricocheted between the ceiling and the ground like a basketball being dribbled, and eventually got its head stuck in the ceiling. Wham! Crumble. Debris fell from above. High orcs and hunters alike were aghast at the sight of the guard's dangling body. Kahun was shaking as he asked Jin Woo,
Just who are you? I'll ask again.
This was the hunters' hunting ground, and there was only one person here who could speak for them.
Am I okay to kill all the magic beasts present?
Kahun had reached the point where the true identity of the luggage carrier didn't matter to him anymore. He was vexed. He was mortified for getting played with like a toy by a damn magic beast. Tears fell from his eyes.
Please go ahead.
That was all Jin Woo needed. As he got to his feet, the orcs started closing in. Behind them was the shaman, who smirked at Jin Woo.
Interesting skills you have there, especially for a mere human.
With a wave of the shaman's fingers, the orcs surrounded Jin Woo.
But I wonder how far your little party tricks will get you.
Jin Woo's gaze turned frosty. He'd never liked magic beasts, but for the first time, he had an intense desire to slay one.
I'm saving you for last.
If the beast could be amused, it could also be frightened. Jin Woo chanted.
My shadows.
His daggers appeared in his grasp.
Come forth.
Skrrrch. A black car pulled over to the side of the road. Sunglasses and a black suit, the man who got out of the driver's seat was Jinchul from the Hunters Association's surveillance team. 3 other men, all members of the surveillance team, also got out of the car.
Manager Wu, weren't we heading back to the association? There's something I need to do.
Jinchul turned his head toward the gate in the distance. A-rank gates will never not be frightening. He squinted. What if that gigantic gate opened and all the magic beasts burst out at once? Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. But why did he apply to be a miner at a horrible place like this? And for not 1, but 2 whole days. Even if President Go hadn't asked him personally to check out the situation, Jinchul would have come to scope things out of his own accord. I can't exactly dig up information on him. The other party was an S-rank awakened being. It'd be difficult for him, an A-rank, to run an investigation on Jin Woo without getting caught. So he decided to boldly come greet him outright. His plan was to tell Jin Woo that he'd had some errands nearby and was dropping in to say hello, then ask him a few questions. He wouldn't think it was strange that I have a few questions, right? Anyone would be curious to know why a confirmed S-rank hunter was subjecting himself to manual labor. Besides, Jin Woo had caught the attention of the Hunters Association. Even the president had taken a particular liking to him and was monitoring his every move. No, not strange at all. It was perfectly natural to be curious and completely normal to ask questions. Jinchul kept telling himself that as he searched for a staff member of the Hunters Guild.
Excuse me, I'm looking for the excavation team. May I ask who? We're from the association.
The staff checked Jinchul's ID and pointed him toward the area where the mining team was waiting.
Right over there. Thank you.
For members from the surveillance team were here to see the excavation team. The foreman seemed to have been told by someone as he rushed over to meet them.
Hello, hello. What brings the association surveillance team here?
The excavation team had been relaxing, but now they looked anxious. The word surveillance team weighed heavily on hunters. They were the judge, jury, and sometimes even executioner of awakened beings who other hunters couldn't handle. Such was the authority of the surveillance team.
What's going on? Surveillance team hunters are here. The surveillance team.
Something was going down. With their interests piqued, they slowly gathered around Yusuk. Jinchul took off his sunglasses. He looked around for Jin Woo to no avail, then finally asked the foreman,
Where can I find Hunter Jin Woo Sung? I knew it.
One hunter suddenly leaped forward. It was Seonggu, who had purposely bumped into Jin Woo yesterday. He spoke so animatedly that he was practically spitting everywhere.
That bastard turned and smiled at me with the eyes of a killer. Man, it scares the bejesus out of me just thinking about it.
Jinchul frowned slightly. The eyes of a killer? What had happened between them? Everyone started talking at once. Jinchul ignored the commotion and focused on Seonggu.
What exactly happened?
Seonggu stopped himself from answering when he realized that it wasn't exactly a tale that painted him in the best light. So he waved away Jinchul's question.
It wasn't a big deal, but the point is, his eyes were scary.
Jinchul turned back to Yoon-suk.
Where is Hunter Jin Woo Sung now? Sung is inside the gate.
Jin Woo went inside an active A-rank dungeon. Jinchul's eyes widened.
Why? Our luggage carrier was a no-show. No one else volunteered for the job, so Sung went in his place. There is one thing. What is it? I'm sure it's nothing, but Hunter Hain Cha, was looking for Sung just now and followed him inside the dungeon. I thought that was quite odd.
The foreman's confusion was clear on his face. Jinchul's thoughts were jumbled after hearing this news. Hain Cha, the vice president of the Hunters Guild, was looking for Jin Woo? Not only that, she followed him into the dungeon? What in the world? Jinchul had only come to check on Jin Woo, but he felt like he had stumbled onto something big. First, I should examine the gate. That seemed to be all he could do at this point.
I'd like to take a look at the gate.
Certainly. The foreman chuckled and waved at him to go ahead. Seonggu hurriedly stopped Jinchul as he was about to depart with his subordinates.
Oh, sir!
Seonggu had an expectant look on his face.
Did that jerk Jin Woo Sung cause some kind of trouble? Did he kill someone? He looked like he'd have no problem doing that.
Jinchul's eye twitched. Suddenly, he understood why Jin Woo had glared at Seonggu. Jin Woo could probably send him flying with a snap of his fingers. But there were too many eyes on him right now. As a hunter of the association, he couldn't lose his cool at civilians. It was one of the downsides of working for the government. Jinchul sighed deeply and responded as politely as he could.
Everything will be explained on the news tomorrow night.
The answer satisfied Seonggu, and his reply was brash and assertive.
See? Didn't I tell you he was suspicious? He didn't look it, though. Yeah, he was a good worker, too.
Seonggu ignored his colleague's lack of support and continued bragging about his ability to spot bad apples. TSK. Jinchul was clearly unimpressed by Seonggu's antics as he turned to the gate instead. But Jinchul instinctively halted a few steps away from the entrance.
Manager Wu?
His subordinates curiously looked at the stunned expression on his face. That can't. This doesn't make sense. Jinchul took out his phone and pulled up the association website. He navigated to the A-rank gate the Hunters Guild was supposed to be raiding today. His eyes widened. Why does it list such a low mana reading? He couldn't help but shake his head. The measurement is wrong. Not all A-rank hunters were built the same, and Jinchel was one of the elite among her ranks. His gut was telling him that the measurement of the gate's mana level was off. He quickly gave an order to one of his subordinates.
Mana meter!
Seeing the grave look on Jinchel's face, the subordinate quickly ran to fetch the meter from the car. The small mana meter used by the surveillance team was much more precise than those used by regular association employees. This particular mana meter rarely malfunctioned or gave false readings, as it utilized high-quality essence stones that cost over $1 billion. Beep! The meter had finished its assessment. Just as I suspected, there was a major difference from the association's measurement. This meant potentially huge problems if the guild had organized a strike squad based on the previous assessment. They should be fine, since there are 2 S ranks, but as Jinchel picked the mana meter off the ground, the gate began to vibrate. Jinchel's body shook from the sudden burst of magic power, as did those of his 3 subordinates, despite their perception being not quite at his level.
And Manager Wu? What just happened?
Jinchel looked at the youngest of his subordinates, whose face had turned pale.
Are you okay? I am fine.
At his subordinate's answer, Jinchel carefully inspected the back of his own hands. They were covered in tiny goosebumps. Jinchel straightened up.
We're going in. Pardon? You mean inside the dungeon?
Jinchel was firm.
If you're scared, you may stay behind.
At this point, he was the only one who knew the reading was wrong. It was his sworn duty to inform the hunters inside. After all, the responsibilities of those in the Hunters Association included managing, monitoring, and aiding other hunters.
And no, sir. We're coming.
Jinchel nodded.
And you, stay behind and report the new reading to the association. WH what? Can you do that?
When Jinchel squeezed the shoulder of the tense youngest subordinate, the man found it in himself to nod affirmatively.
Yes, sir. I can.
Jinchel turned to look at the gate. The immense power coming from the dungeon aside, there was yet another incredible source of mana emanating its power in waves. What the hell is going on in there? With Jinchel in the lead, the surveillance team threw themselves into the dungeon. Meanwhile, Hayne was tracking down the whereabouts of the strike squad within the dungeon. Strange. Why aren't there any traces of magic beasts? In a regular dungeon, there would be a path of carcasses littering the ground from the entrance all the way to the boss's lair. But no matter where she looked, Hayne couldn't find any. Were all the magic beasts gathered in one place? Oh! As she was pondering the possibilities, she finally came across some cadavers. TMP, TMP, TMP. Hayne, the S-rank brawler that she was, made her way to the battleground lightning quick. How is that possible? Her eyes were round as she surveyed the field. All the dead bodies were high orc warriors, easily distinguishable from ordinary orcs by their red skin and long lower canines. How did Cahun's squad defeat this many high orcs? More surprisingly, she saw no signs of fallen hunters. Although, had there been any casualties, the strike squad likely would have retreated and saved her this trip. Have I been underestimating A and B rank hunters? It was possible. From what she could observe, the battle appeared to have been a decisive victory for the hunters. But what is this? Something caught Hayne's eye, and she crouched to inspect one of the corpses. What she saw surprised her. She quickly checked the other remains. Here, and here too. Her suspicions were slowly being confirmed. But how? How could this be? Almost all the high orc carcasses had wounds inflicted by a short, sharp weapon. These attacks weren't fatal, but they would be enough to immobilize the high orcs. It was as if the other hunters had merely contributed the finishing touches on a masterpiece for which someone else had done most of the work. It could be said that one hunter had massacred 20 high orcs. Only 2 of the orcs had died differently. One had been forcefully decapitated while the other had received a fatal blow to the head. Then, with the exception of these 2, a single person took down the rest? Was that even possible? Despite her confidence in her own speed, she doubted she could accomplish the same feat plus, as far as she knew, there weren't any assassin-class hunters assigned to Cahun's squad who used a short sword or dagger. A dagger? That brought a certain image to mind. She was certain the man standing in front of the boss's lair yesterday, Ji Wu, had been holding some kind of short weapon in each hand. Is he responsible for all this? As she was arriving at a conclusion, Haynes suddenly whipped around to face the depths of the dungeon. Her face was grim. She felt a wave of magic so powerful that it seemed more akin to a vibration, the likes of which she'd never experienced before. The air itself had reverberated. No! She bit her lip. If this was the boss's magic power, no one from Cahun's squad would survive. She sprinted toward the lair as fast as she could. Come forth! It all began with those words. Whyish. His magic energy cast vibrations stronger than the shaman's. But that wasn't the only change. As he revealed his power, the shadow beneath Jinwu's feet began expanding as well. Like ink poured into water, the shadow spread out at a terrifying rate.
Whoa! What's that?
The strike squad hunters were astonished as they watched the shadow passing beneath their feet. How to process this? Even the most experienced hunters had never seen or heard of such a phenomenon. Fear started creeping into their hearts. Cahun could witness everything from where he lay helpless, trembling. What is he trying to do? He got his answer once the shadow covered the entire floor of the lair. SHHHHHF. The black surface rippled as shadows in black armor rose from the ground. Skill, Monarch's domain has been activated. Abilities of all shadow soldiers fighting on the surface of your shadow will increase by 50%. Jinwu smiled lightly. Excellent. Monarch's domain was a job-exclusive skill he acquired after reaching level 70 in the Demon's Castle. As the soldiers' abilities increased even further, Jinwu could sense their morale. Naturally, satisfaction was written all over his face. The 50 summoned shadow soldiers surrounded Jinwu like bodyguards.
Jiger! Ra!
The high orc warriors, despite being known for their bravery, retreated after becoming intimidated by Jinwu and his soldiers.
The orcs are backing down. What is happening?
Although the unbelievable circumstances had the hunters quaking in their boots, they began to have hope.
Did you feel that too?
Yeah.
Does any of this make sense?
The mage hunters who were sensitive to mana couldn't stop their own hearts from racing in response. To think that the source of the unbelievably huge amount of magic was the ear-rank hunter they'd brought as backup. To start, is this even magic? It's more sinister than the shaman's. The sheer force of the magic filling the boss's lair was making it hard to breathe. The hunters were relieved that the one wielding this much power was on their side. Conversely, the high orcs were very nervous. With the shadow soldiers' appearance, the odds had gone from 1 hunter against 150 orcs to 50 soldiers against 150 orcs. Moreover, these weren't just any 50 soldiers. They were much stronger than their number indicated. As if out to prove this point, Jinwu charged first. When he did, the shaman yelled,
"Why were you all standing around? Kill that human at once!"
Galvanized by the voice imbued with magic, the high orcs raised their weapons and roared.
Grah!
Shing, SHHHK. Monarch's domain affected only the Shadow Soldiers, but despite the lack of buffs, Jin Woo was already on another level.
Arg! Graga!
The Orcs screamed. Both bodies and blood flew everywhere as Jin Woo swung his 2 daggers. At the speed he was moving, Jin Woo's actions were a blur of afterimages, even in the eyes of the elite hunters.
Hey! Yeah, he's like the vice president.
Hane's nickname was
The Dancer.
Even though she was usually so collected, when she was on the attack, her movements looked like she was dancing at a fast tempo, which was how she'd earned the nickname. It embarrassed Hane, so she'd forbidden people from using it, which meant the title wasn't widely known. Still, it came up now and then. The luggage carrier's movements were at the same level as Hane's, or maybe even superior. If she was a graceful dancer, then Jin Woo was a typhoon. He crushed magic beasts from the eye of a storm. Gra. The Shadow Soldiers also held their own. His soldiers, led by Tank, the previous head of the Ice Bears, charged at their enemies. Iron held the front line. As his pre-battle ritual, he puffed out his chest and bellowed. Gwa. Iron is using skill, Epic Taunt. The debuff has been cancelled out by the opponent's high resistance level. Enraged that his skill didn't work, Iron shrieked loudly and began smashing the Orcs with his mighty iron hammer. Whoosh! Croc! Crunch!
Arg! Gaw!
Some of the hunters actually felt pity for the Orcs in Iron's way. In complete contrast to Iron, Igris efficiently but mercifully cut the enemy's throats. The Orcs that died at Igris's hand didn't even have time to scream. SHHHK. Each time Igris swung his sword, another Orc lost its head. It wasn't as easy for the regular Shadow Soldiers to deal with the high Orcs, but they had endless strength and infinite regeneration on their side. While the infantry soldiers preoccupied the Orcs, mage soldiers were able to rain down a torrent of fire. Kaboom! Whum! The number of high Orcs dwindled quickly. The shaman's puffy cheeks quivered. How dare this measly human? Its eyes were fixed on Jin Woo as its first target. The soldiers in black armor had been summoned by that human. Once the human was dead, his troops would disappear too. The shaman started casting a spell on Jin Woo. Its lips moved rapidly. The song of impediment, the song of blindness, the song of high fever, the song of extreme pain, and the song of sleep. 5 powerful curses were completed in no time and aimed at the enemy.
Done!
The shaman leered. Jin Woo sensed the traces of mana traveling toward him as soon as the curses were completed. Magic? Jin Woo and the shaman made eye contact. It sneered at him. It's too late, human. Unlike ordinary magic, curses were inescapable. Once cast, that was the end. They'd turn him into a walking corpse primed to be slashed into pieces by the high Orc warriors' machetes. It would be the perfect end for a human who didn't know his place. But at that moment, Jin Woo heard that familiar electric sound. Ping! An irregular status condition has occurred. The irregular status condition has been removed by buff, immunity. Ping, ping, ping! More alerts sounded in quick succession. Curse. Impediment has been removed. Curse. Blindness has been removed. The 5 curses were eliminated before they could have any effect. Heh. Jin Woo was the one smiling now. This was the buff he'd received when he had first become a player. The great spellcaster Candiara's blessing. Long-lasting buff, health and longevity. You are immunized against all diseases, poisons, and any other debuffs. Your healing ability increases exponentially when you are asleep. Thanks to this blessing, Jin Woo didn't have to worry about magic that affected his physical condition, like curses.
WH what?
The shaman shuddered. As the boss of an A-rank dungeon, it immediately detected that its curses had been dispelled by some kind of force. How could he block curses set by me? It didn't make sense. In order to neutralize someone's curse, you needed purification magic or a blessing from a higher level spellcaster. Does that mean one of these humans is a higher level spellcaster than I am? Before it could ponder this any further, shooting pain from its foot caused it to screech in agony.
AR!
When it looked down, it saw that a dagger had pierced its foot.
Growling.
It was Jinwoo's dagger, Night Killer. The shaman looked up in a murderous rage.
How dare you!
Jinwoo slashed at another incoming orc, then silently mouthed a message to the shaman.
Sit tight and wait your turn.
In other words, don't do anything rash. The shaman's glowering face was as red as a ripened tomato.
How dare a puny human!
It still had the energy to get enraged. Jinwoo's expression grew cold. In truth, he could have disposed of the shaman as soon as the battle began, but hadn't because he wanted to instill some fear in the shaman just as it had to his fellow hunters. However, it looked like he hadn't done enough to shake the beast. Its eyes were still animated. Well then, all right, I'll give you a show. Time to put the power of a necromancer on full display. The Shadow. Monarch regarded his surroundings as if a delicious feast had been spread out before him. Black eddies of smoke rose from the dead bodies of the high orcs, like they'd been awaiting Jinwoo's call. And call them he did.
Arise!
Beginning shadow extraction attempt. Along with the system's message came a horrible cry of death from out of nowhere. Gaw! The shaman's eyes popped out.
What is this?
It couldn't even complete its sentence. It was interrupted by the sight of black hands rising from the shadows of the high orc corpses. Shadow extraction successful. Jinwoo smiled at the new recruits joining his shadow army. My warriors have become undead. The shaman trembled. 50 of its warriors had lost their lives. That was about the same number of new soldiers swathed in black armor. That means all his soldiers were. The shaman realized that this mysterious human wasn't commanding any ordinary army. It also realized just how disadvantaged they now were. The battle of 50 soldiers versus 150 high orcs was now an even 100 versus 100. High orc warriors who'd fought bravely against enemies more powerful than them in the past had lost the will to fight upon seeing their fallen comrades reborn as shadow soldiers.
G growling. Groar. Grr.
The usually fearless high orc warriors were visibly falling back. This was their greatest nightmare, becoming an undead minion of the enemy instead of dying gloriously in battle and going to a warrior's heaven. Jinwoo's show of power was having its intended effect. It worked on the warriors, but what about the shaman? He examined the look on its face. Oh ho! Jinwoo brightened. Finally, the terror was clear in its eyes. The shaman trembled as it recalled the one with the ability to turn the dead into shadows. There couldn't be two beings with the same power. That was him. That's him. Then how did we come to be here? As soon as the shaman became aware of itself and themselves, its mind was wiped clean. The only emotion left was terror. Jinwoo was satisfied. That's right. Stay just like that. He was saving the shaman for last. His plan to instill some fear into the shaman had been successful. He turned, smiling, then blinked as a familiar face at the cave entrance caught his attention. Who is that again? She was vaguely familiar, yet not to him. It took him a moment to remember her name. Hain Cha, one of the S-rank hunters in the Hunters Guild. But what is she doing here? Yet Jin was surprised at seeing her didn't hold a candle to Hane's complete astonishment as she took in the sight of Jin Woo and his shadow soldiers.